Big sky, big potential. This is Eastern Promise. Welcome to episode 73 of the Eastern Promise podcast. I'm Mike Rigby, and this week I'll be talking to a Norfolk-based training firm taking medical skills to the care sector. Sepsis, which occurs when the body's immune system overreacts to an infection, is at best claiming scarce NHS resources and at worst tens of thousands of lives every year. NR Medical Training was started by Rachel Holden and Neil Fossett. Rachel and Neil have seen that the social care sector isn't equipped to speak about sepsis in the same language as the NHS. And that's why they've created a course to bridge the gap. And finally, Hot Town, summer on the river, in the city. We're messing about in boats in the heat of the urban jungle in this week's CrowdSourcery. Sepsis is a killer. It's when the body's immune system goes into overdrive in response to something as potentially insignificant as a cut or a bite, and begins to attack healthy tissue. According to the UK Sepsis Trust, 5 people an hour lose their lives to sepsis in the UK. Or around 48,000 people a year. If caught early enough, sepsis is completely treatable, if it's caught early enough. If it's not, even when it's not fatal, sepsis can still leave survivors with long-term mental and physical damage. In Norfolk, former paramedics Neil Fossett and Rachel Holden, founders of NR Medical Training, have been bringing their deep knowledge of emergency medicine to clients as diverse as equestrian settings and offshore wind farms. This experience has given them an insight into the way that the social care sector isn't equipped to speak about sepsis in the same language as the NHS. This can lead to unnecessary hospitalisation, or worse, sepsis being missed until it is far, far too late. We'll hear more from Rachel and Neil in a moment. But first, here's a brief message from the Chief Executive of the UK Sepsis Trust, Dr. Ron Daniels.
Hello, my name's Dr. Ron Daniels. I'm an intensive care consultant in Birmingham in the West Midlands, and I'm also the founder and chief executive of the UK-based charity, the UK Sepsis Trust. And we at the Sepsis Trust fulfil 3 critical functions. First, we raise public awareness so that members of the public know how and when to access healthcare if they're deteriorating in the context of an infection. Second, we support people affected by sepsis, whether they've survived it and have some challenges in their recovery, whether they are supporting someone who survived sepsis, which can be equally difficult, or whether they've been bereaved by sepsis. And the third thing that we do, and the reason I'm talking to you today, is we equip health professionals and carers with the tools, knowledge and skills to act quickly if someone they're advocating for or they're treating is beginning to deteriorate with infection. And that's why we are so excited to have partnered with NR Medical Training to deliver much needed awareness into the care home setting. Now, sepsis is an enormously common problem. Across the UK, it's estimated to affect 245,000 people every year and claim as many as 48,000 lives. Around the world, sepsis claims more lives than cancer. And as we age, or if we have underlying health problems, we are more at risk of sepsis. And that's why it's so important that you and the people you work with know what to do. Now, NICE issue recommendations around sepsis, including risk factors. And many care home residents will have one or more of these risk factors. They include advancing age. They include underlying conditions, particularly those which make infection more likely, such as diabetes or COPD. They include people who are receiving immunosuppressant therapy. Now, that'll include anti-cancer therapies, but it'll also include things like steroids that people might be taking for other conditions. People with indwelling devices, such as intravenous drips, such as catheters, are more at risk of developing sepsis. And so you can see that the people you advocate for have almost certainly at least one of these risk factors. Now, obviously, we recognise that not everyone who's a resident in a care home will be appropriate for hospital assessment and treatment. But the basics of sepsis intervention, which include, for example, antibiotics, can be delivered even for those residents in the community setting if hospital transfer is not appropriate. So it's really important that we all know and understand what to look for. And this training that we're delivering in partnership with NR Medical will deliver that information into your hands so that you can safeguard your residents. We very much look forward to working together on this to make sure that fewer people in your care come to harm from sepsis. Thank you.
I wanted to know more about NR medical training, and especially the way in which Rachel and Neil are empowering carers with life-saving knowledge. I met up with Rachel and Neil in the business centre of the Millennium Library in Norwich.
It is an absolute honour to be joined here by Rachel Holden and Neil Fossett of NR Medical Training. I'll start with you, Rachel. Welcome to Eastern Promise. And can I ask you to give just a quick potted history of yourself, and then I'm going to ask Neil to do the same. And then we'll come on to tell us about NR Medical Training and how it all got started. But just tell us about yourself first.
Yeah, of course. So I started my career in health and social care around 21 years ago, there or thereabouts. I started life as a carer. I was looking after young children with learning disabilities, and I moved from there to work in elderly care and support work, and I've worked with lots of different client groups along the way, mental health, did a little bit in child protection as well for a little while, and then I went to university to study for my paramedic science degree, became qualified, and then since qualifying I have worked in numerous settings, in GP surgeries and in A&E. And then I went on to do some further training in forensics and worked as a forensic paramedic in police custody, which I really enjoyed. And I did a bit of education in there and in the middle of all of that as well. So yeah, a varied background, but all in health and social care.
Neil, let's come to you.
Sure. So mine's equally varied.
But much more impressive.
No, it's not at all, no. So again, roughly 20 years of experience in sort of emergency services roles, in a variety of those roles. So I started life in my 20s as a police officer with the Metropolitan Police, and spent roughly 3 to 4 years there. Then took a step sort of sideways and joined the Fire and Rescue Service. And I spent best part of 10 years in the Fire and Rescue Service. Obviously started life as a firefighter, and then got promoted and did sort of incident command. That's where I sort of developed my sort of passion for training. So I went into the training development team with the Fire and Rescue Service, started teaching things like incident command training, breathing apparatus training, and lots of different sort of things there, disciplines, and absolutely fell in love with training. When I left sort of the UK Fire and Rescue Service. I went and did a bit of time as a civilian contractor in Afghanistan. We were part of the emergency sort of response team responding to incidents on the base. But also our mission there was to train Afghan firefighters. So as part of Operation Resolute Support, trying to build up the sort of resilience of the local populace. So we were busy training Afghans. And I spent a year doing that. And when I came back, my father and stepmother spent their careers in the London Ambulance Service. And I kind of thought, well, I've done all the others. I might as well join the ambulance service. I had a keen interest in healthcare anyway, especially in Afghanistan. We were dealing with a lot of injuries and things, sort of medevacs coming in to the airbase and dealing with those casualties as they sort of, we handed over to the field medics, obviously, but it sort of developed a keen interest in me in medicine. So I wanted to explore that a little bit further. So I joined the London Ambulance Service, where I trained as an associate ambulance practitioner, and then went to East of England, and I've spent the last 6 years in emergency healthcare before we started in our medical training. And yeah, that's why we're here.
Go back to Rachel now. We're gonna ask for the history of NR medical training, how you got started, and what you do basically.
So about a year ago, we were chatting one afternoon, I believe, just about ideas and whatnot that we had, and obviously we've both got background in education, and we both had a bit of a eureka moment and thought, actually, why don't we start a training company? Because of our experience, we've had some fantastic mentors ourselves along the way in various settings. And I know Neil certainly has in police, fire and ambulance. I certainly have throughout my years in health and social care as a paramedic. And we kind of wanted to pass that on really to other people. So one afternoon sort of developed the idea and then went for it.
You'd obviously got a passion for training, so was it all kind of baked in how you were going to get going? You kind of knew what to do?
Well, yeah, we had an idea, and like Rachel said, we both received some fantastic training over the years, but equally, we'd also received some really poor training in the past as well. So we know what that felt like, and we wanted to give people back our collective 40 years of experience in emergency response and healthcare. And we thought, you know, we can do this. We're actually really good at training, and we want to pass on this bank of knowledge that we've both collectively built up. The other staff members that work for us as well are equally experienced as well. We only recruit those type of people. So it's that combination that the magic is the experience and the expertise. That's not enough. You need to have charisma, you need to have all those great communication skills. Yeah. That's what makes good training, and that's where real learning takes place. Mm-hmm. It takes place when you blend those two. Mm-hmm. So I think it was a eureka moment, having that realisation that actually we can make a big impact, and we want to sort of give something back. And we developed a range of training as well, including, which we're going to be talking about in a moment, I think, the sepsis training that we're really passionate about. You know, We've seen the devastating effects of sepsis firsthand, especially on the front line. And there's not a training session we do, whether it be sepsis or otherwise, or the other training we do as well, where somebody doesn't have an experience with sepsis. There's always anecdotes around that that we, and that's part of how we train. It's about storytelling.
You pull those out.
Absolutely, those stories are vital because there's evidence to suggest that storytelling in education is really, really powerful. And that's not just the stories from the instructor swinging the lamp. That's sharing stories between peers, and that's where the real learning takes place, and we love that.
I mean, it can be so important, especially in a professional setting, to know, Rachel, that the person who is up there training you has those experiences themselves to call on, and isn't just reading from a manual.
Absolutely, and we've gotten a lot of our feedback is just that. We feel that we've got more in-depth training because you guys have had the experience, our instructors have had that experience of carrying out CPR on somebody, or dressing that wound, or stopping that bleed, or supporting somebody in a mental health crisis, whatever that may be. We've done those things in a real life setting, and I think that brings that realness, and I think gives faith in us as well as trainers and instructors, that you wouldn't necessarily get had you not have had those experiences.
I mean, what's the bank of clients you have, where do they come from? I mean, we'll come on to sepsis, but the sepsis training specifically. But in terms of the broader offer, where do you draw your bank of clients from?
Everywhere. Which can be a challenge in terms of marketing. When you speak to a marketing professional, they often want you to narrow down your client base. Ultimately, our clients are from care homes, schools, offices, small businesses, high risk industry.
We recently just carried out some training for those that work on wind turbines and
of course
out at sea. So
yeah, so
everywhere. Hugely
varied, and there's some legislation that legislates, particularly first aid training and things like that. There's some legislature around that. But yeah, our client base is very varied. So the good thing is we recognise that, and we can. Although accredited courses have a fixed learning outcomes, we can tailor the courses to match the business, so match the risks. We can add things in where we feel they're appropriate, or the client feels they're appropriate. So we can adapt. That's our client base, hugely varied and everywhere.
Yeah, and taking accredited courses as well, because that's important that they've got that piece of certification at the end. Sepsis. Now, I did some reading around sepsis. I've never been so terrified in my life. As you say, that the chances of nearly everyone, particularly in a medical setting, will have had at some point some experience of sepsis. Do you just want to explain to us, Rachel, what sepsis is? Because it sounds like lots of things you might have heard of, but what is it?
So sepsis isn't something that you can just catch. We don't just catch sepsis. Sepsis develops from an infection that somebody may already have. That could be anything from somebody's had a bite and it's got infected, or it could be from a urine infection. And it's the body's overreaction, the body's immune system's overreaction to that infection, so much so that it can then start to destroy healthy tissues as well, and can ultimately be fatal if not treated.
So medical professionals on the front line and in the blue light services. I mean, you've got the whole gamut, Neil. So we can trust you to tell us. Would be pretty well skilled at this point, one would assume, in spotting sepsis.
Yes, there's a lot of training in the acute ambulance setting and hospital settings. There's a tremendous amount of training and effort that's gone into. Enabling staff to recognise sepsis early, and that's the key, recognising sepsis early, because sepsis is it's completely preventable. Yeah. It's completely treatable if the caveat is if you catch it early. Yeah. It's when it's not caught early that we end up with hospitalisations, we end up with long-term health problems, we end up in ITU, and sadly approximately 48,000 people in the UK lose their lives to sepsis every year. So that's when the problems occur.
I mean, that's a higher death toll than a suite of cancers put together. I can't recall which ones they are, but and it's I think it's something that's so well known medically in the medical profession, as you say, totally treatable. But laymen like myself, we've kind of heard this scary thing, and you just don't think it can happen from something, as you say, as insignificant as a bite. But what I think is extraordinary about the course that you've put together, because you've seen a need and you've put that together, you've done that specifically for the care sector, where you've got a concentration of really vulnerable people, and whose age and vulnerability makes it incredibly difficult, even so much harder to spot. And so that training can be so much more important. So, Rachel, could you just start by telling us where the idea for this specific piece of training came from?
I think it was about noting that there was a disconnect in the language used. So, as Neil said, in ambulance trusts, in hospital settings, we all have a certain type of language when we speak about sepsis. And in care and support, in the care and support sector, they don't speak the same language as the NHS. And as we were talking about last night, the NHS and the health and social care sector have a symbiotic relationship. If one falls, so does the other. And unfortunately, we are seeing failings on both sides, and that's because they're both relatively unstable at the moment. So I think from our perspective, from frontline A&E work, from ambulance work, we saw that care and support staff, if we went to a job at a residential home, for example, there would be one or two things would happen. There would be somebody incredibly poorly where it hadn't been spotted soon enough, or conversely, perhaps they didn't need to be in hospital at that time and an ambulance wasn't the right pathway for them. And that's not pointing a finger of blame at anybody.
No.
That's we feel down to a lack of training. So we want to bridge that gap between the NHS and health and social care and ensure that everybody's speaking the same language, and through that provide empowerment to this hugely important group of people that we feel certainly sometimes fall under the radar. And that's not fair, because we are all doing the same job, whether you're a top consultant at a London hospital or you are a care and support worker working in a residential home. We are all there for the same reason, and that's to look after and care for others. It doesn't matter how you're doing that job, we're all doing the same thing.
I think listeners and viewers will see sort of how important, from what you're saying, from how you're saying it, how important that is. I mean, Neil, Rachel told me that you'd come back from an ambulance shift going, it's so frustrating. It's so easy to stop it, and yet there we were. So tell me how that kind of first course got put together, because Rachel said before, the frustration she feels that people say, well, I'm only a carer, who's going to listen to me? You've got that language disconnect between the NHS and the health and care sector, which are looking after our beloved but frail relatives. How did you start putting that course together?
Well, I think you're right. We often had those conversations and those frustrations about, this is preventable, and we first started looking at examining what training we had and what training was supplied to existing healthcare staff in hospitals and acute ambulance trusts. And we noticed that since 2012, there's been an implementation of an early warning scoring system. It's called NEWS, a NEWS 2 score. So that's the National Early Warning Score System.
Yeah.
Now that's been mandated in those hospital and ambulance environments for a long time, for years, and it relies on 6 basic physiological measurements that every healthcare professional takes. What we realised was most of the care homes we're going to also take these measurements, but because of a lack of training and understanding, perhaps, they weren't necessarily connecting the dots, and certainly not using the National Early Warning Score System. So they're non-invasive clinical observations, or vital signs, as we call them. Things like heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, temperature, things like that, levels of consciousness. Really easy to do. It takes seconds to do, but with using the National Early Warning Score System, it's a fantastic predictor of how likely that patient is, or resident is, to deteriorate clinically. And it's not just used for sepsis; it's used across the board for any illness. But it can be used as a really powerful clinical indicator of deterioration in those patients. So the light bulb moment was, well, this isn't something that's particularly difficult. You don't need any particularly specialist training to do this. These are things that care and support staff do routinely most days anyway, especially post-COVID. Everyone's got a temperature monitor and things like that, but they've normally got these things dotted around in the care home. Why don't we formally train up the care staff? We'll show them how to take clinical observations accurately, and we'll tie that in with the NEWS 2 system. And now what you've got is a care worker who might be worried about a particular resident, who can then take a set of clinical observations accurately. They can calculate a NEWS 2 score. And then when they call the GP or ring 999, or when they want to escalate that care to wherever they decide to, we talk to them how to escalate that care and what's appropriate. Now they can speak the same language, because now they can say, my resident is 85. My resident hasn't passed urine in 18 hours. My resident's got a temperature of this, their blood pressure is this, their heart rate is this, and their NEWS 2 score is this. Suddenly the GP or paramedic or EMT, whoever's on scene, they're speaking the same language.
Yeah, and it saves so much time.
And it's so powerful because things don't get missed. patients who are acutely unwell get the care and support they need early. That's the key, early recognition. Therefore, it reduces hospital admissions. It improves patient outcomes. We nip these things in the bud as early as possible.
Now, ambulance call-outs
and reducing ambulance call-outs, or certainly hospital admissions. And let's not forget, vulnerable people, when they go into hospital, you know, there are hospital-acquired infections that do happen. Obviously, there are steps and infection prevention control measures that take place in hospital to try and prevent this as much as possible, but they do happen. You know, COVID isn't the only one. You know, you've got things like MRSA, C. diff, all those kind of things that people can catch while in hospital. They're not exactly the best places if you're already vulnerable. So if we can keep people out of hospital and we can get somebody a course of antibiotics nice and early, and prevent this from even developing into sepsis, that's the key. And we think we can not only save hundreds, if not thousands, of lives by doing this, we think we can also save the NHS and wider society a whole load of money as well.
The two things work very nicely together, I have to say. You know, especially for anyone listening from care settings, NHS, and who knows, central government. We can hope. But Rachel, that must be an incredibly powerful light bulb moment when you've got the care workers in front of you as you're delivering the course, and Neil as well, obviously, to see, oh, you mean that? But when we call it that, and you call it that, oh, now I see. Yeah. And, you know, to have those, that must be incredibly powerful and rewarding for you as well to see.
It's so many things. Initially, when we first started it was a course, and now it's developed into this huge thing that we feel is incredibly powerful. It is empowering. It's empowering care staff, empowering support staff to be able to quantify illness rather than having that gut feeling. Because let's not forget, care and support staff know their residents, know people in their care incredibly well. They work with them day in, day out. They work with them in their most intimate and personal moments, helping somebody get washed and dressed every day, knowing what time they have lunch, knowing what their favourite drink is. They're all incredibly personal things to know about somebody. An ambulance crew arriving has just met that person, and perhaps a GP doesn't know that person as well either. Yeah. Same as hospital staff when somebody goes in. So being able to use their knowledge of that person and then being able to quantify, knowing something's not right. You know, resident A, you know, normally has lunch at 12 and it suddenly isn't hungry today, or suddenly is acting out of character that isn't normal for them. And being able to say, actually, I'm going to go and do a News 2 score now, and then monitor that person and know what to do with that information as well. That in itself is empowering, so let alone all the other sort of knock-on effects that then has for these people. And we really feel that it will make not only a difference to our most vulnerable in society, spotting sepsis early and preventing these people from deteriorating. And that's not just elderly care homes either. That could be a residential home for those with chronic mental health conditions, or those with learning disabilities. So it has such a wider impact than just...
I think you've given people a language to talk about these things, to discuss these things, to convey information in a rapid way, because there is no allowance on a protocol for a gut feeling. As powerful and as correct as that gut feeling is, you can't dial 999 and say, well, I've got a hunch, something's wrong, because they're desperately trying to do the right thing on one end of the phone and on the other, but the other thing is, I can't do anything on the basis, and you'll know, I can't do anything on the basis of something's not right, you know? Yeah.
And so, that's why it's so powerful.
That is why it's so powerful. And I hope I got this right, but I think you mentioned that the course for participants doesn't cost anything.
So, since partnering with the Sepsis Trust, we've had to. We now run it not for profit. We keep it not for profit. Yeah, not for profit. Yeah, to keep it as accessible as is possible. We would love to be able to continue running this for free. Initially, when we started out, we did run it for free, but now the uptake has become more and more. The involvement of the Sepsis Trust. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to be able to offer it for free anymore. However, That being said, it's run not for profit to keep the cost down as much as is possible. 10% of every course booked goes straight back to the UK Sepsis Trust.
That's great.
So they have a donation.
Do you get any sense that the knowledge you impart on the course then cascades outwards throughout like a care setting and from relatives?
Absolutely. One example of that is we delivered a course to a company called Home Support Matters, and they're based down in Beccles. So we met a lovely lady down there called Hannah. She's part of the training team there, and she called us. She wanted the course, and we went there to deliver it. And the changes there have been huge. So they've actually developed some of what we've been teaching them into their own training programs for their domiciliary carers. They're also looking in the future at providing, they're not doing it yet, but just due to funds, but they're looking at providing all of their visiting domiciliary carers with an OBS kit, with blood pressure machine and things like that. So if they're worried, they can immediately do a News 2 score. So that one course has certainly had a huge impact, and we've also had a number of success stories where carers have, on the back of the training that we've delivered, have done a News 2 score. They've escalated care and they've prevented hospital admission, and we're already seeing that, which is fantastic for everybody involved.
It is. I was just going to come on to ask, have you heard that things have turned out for the best thanks to your training, and they absolutely have. That's amazing. What's your range in terms of how far you can go to deliver this training?
Well, we're a Norfolk-based business, so far we have delivered locally to care organisations within Norfolk and Suffolk. We, with the support of the UK Sepsis Trust, who, by the way, co-authored and endorsed our training course completely, Dr. Ron Daniels has been great and supported us and helped us develop the course to a point where they were, everybody's happy that it's as good as it can be. Obviously, we're always trying to develop and make things better, constantly looking to improve, but it's got to a point now. But yeah, with the help of the Sepsis Trust, they've got a bank of instructors as well that they can call upon. So we made it clear with Dr. Daniels that we wanted to take this course nationally. We believe that this training, in an ideal world, would be mandated in care organisations. It's not at the moment, but we would love to see it mandated. And we want to take it national. And the pipe dream is to have every care organisation in the UK sepsis trained, News 2 trained. If we do that, we're going to see a huge benefit.
And hopefully better outcomes for sepsis, and reduction of hospital admissions, reduction of ambulance call-outs as well, hopefully, better relationships with primary care services for care homes and care services, better morale within care homes.
I was just thinking that how wonderful it must be to have that, the confidence it gives you when you're talking the same language and you know you're not going to be, the paramedic's not going to go, the what, sorry? You've got the who, that, what, and they're going, right, got you. And that's like,
to enable them to, we want people to be proud of what they're doing. We want you to be proud to. I hate the term, I'm just a carer. They don't believe us, I'm just a carer. I hate that. No one's just anything. You are a carer. That is an amazing job. Not everybody can do that job. It is incredibly difficult. And these people should be celebrated, and they should also be given every tool at their disposal to be able to enable them, to be able to look after the people they're looking after to the best of their ability. And yet another reason, why we developed this course with them in mind, for that very reason.
Well, I mean, ideally, we would love to see it free at the point of access to care organisations. That would be amazing, because we know that care organisations' budgets are stretched. We know that. Which partly why we initially tried to offer it completely for free. Now we're doing it not for profit, but we would love to see it free at the point of access. The only way that could happen is if local government or government nationally helped to push this out and fund the training. Now, when you look at how much money can be saved, even if just one care home, if one care organisation prevented one hospital admission a year,
Just one.
We're talking hundreds of millions, if not billions, of savings.
Do you know what? I'm sitting here listening to you, and I don't want you to this to freak you out, but given I've got sort of past history in sort of Parliament and select committees, I just have got this vision now of you saying everything you've just said in front of the Health and Social Care Committee, and what a powerful testimony that would be, and how they should ballywell ought to sit up and listen to what you've got to say. It is an amazing thing you've done. Just in terms of just NR medical training as well, to see the need, but this course in specifically, the value you're placing on these people is wonderful and so empowering for them. You've done a fantastic thing. All power to you. It's slightly grandiose, but I shall speak for the East of England and Eastern Promise. So proud of what you're doing. So proud that you're in our region doing it, and all power to you. Wish you every success.
Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
And thank you for having us.
You're very welcome.
My thanks to Neil and Rachel of NR Medical Training. To find out more about the services they offer, go to their website at nrmedical.training. And you can find out more information about sepsis at the UK Sepsis Trust, sepsistrust.org. Eastern Promise is taking a short breather for the summer, but we will be back in September, rested and ready to be tested. Before then, I'll be announcing some exciting news about the future of the Eastern Promise CIC. But what of the podcast? I hear you cry. Well, I'll be dropping in on the Norwich City Community Sports Foundation and the Cambridge United Foundation to see how our region's clubs give back to the cities and communities around them. Spoiler alert. They do. They bloody well do. I'll also be in Southwold to meet with Adnam's boss, Andy Wood, OBE, and not just to catch some free samples. Well, not only. We'll be looking back at Andy's time as the inaugural chairman of the New Anglia LEP, taking his views on where our region goes from here. And we'll also be discussing how and why Adnams has made such a good name for itself at the forefront of the brewing and hospitality industry's sustainability drive. The Norwich Research Park will once again play host to Eastern Promise as we follow in the hallowed footsteps of BBC Radio 4 and visit the Quadram Institute. I'll be talking to the Institute Director, Professor Ian Charles OBE, about the role the QI is playing at the heart of the virtuous circle of food, farming, agri-tech and healthcare that's taking shape just outside Norwich. Not only that, I'll be taking you around the QI in sound with Life Science and Healthcare Partnerships Lead for the University of Cambridge, Dr. Tammy Dugan, as my special guest. I'll be seeing what she makes of it all, a real pan-Anglian effort. But wait, there's even more! Eastern Promise will be dropping in on Chief Executive of the Zoological Society of East Anglia, Claudia Roberts, at the world-renowned Banham Zoo. Meanwhile, Growth EQ boss Joe Graziano will be telling us about the search for tech talent in Cambridge and across our region, and how he goes about bringing the best to the East. In Suffolk, I'll be asking Kath Cockshaw of Locus and Emily Shipperson of the Suffolk Archives about the Thomas Wolsey 550 project, along with one very notable guest. Let's see here. His Majesty Henry VIII? Hold on, that can't be right. It is. My word. I'm also really looking forward to welcoming Professor Andy Neely, Senior Pro-Vice Chancellor for Enterprise and Business Relations, to the Eastern Promise podcast. I'm particularly excited to ask him how he gets out of bed every morning without his head exploding with the sheer magnitude of the opportunity before him. And speaking of Cambridge and opportunity, keep your ears open for a 2-part special later this year, when I'll be joined by a smorgasbord of special guests to discuss how the A11 corridor in Norfolk, with its direct road and rail connections to Cambridge, can support sustainable growth in that city by virtue of the land it has available, the facilities already in play, and in Thetford in particular, access to both a beautiful market town, one that's too long been a diamond in the rough when it should just be an unashamed diamond, and the unique green space of Thetford Forest and the Brecks. Does that sound like fun? Thought so. Oh, and by the way, the first major live Eastern Promise event will take place this year on the 12th of October 2023 at Jesus College in Cambridge, looking at how we take the beautiful historic buildings we have from Woodbridge to Wells next the sea and ensure they're ready for a net zero future, how to repurpose and revive unused heritage, and how to find the funding to meet the costs of it all. Early bird tickets are now on sale via Eventbrite. Just look out for Future-Proofing Our Heritage from Eastern Promise. Or for more information, get in touch via mike@easternpromise.site. Or go to our website at easternpromise.org.uk. And now, with this region being overwhelmingly rural, it's not altogether hard to find a picturesque stretch of water out in open countryside. But that's not our destination, oh no. We're looking at urban waterways, where the metro meets the H2O on this week's
CrowdSourcery.
Yes, CrowdSourcery. And where else would we be than here on the River Cam, aboard a punt, gently watching the world pass by. I've just about managed to restrain Engineer 49 from installing an outboard motor. I've had to take him to return the desk fans and the bar stools he borrowed so he could turn this beloved piece of Cambridge's history into something you're more likely to see in the Florida Everglades. I left him sulking in the Bridge Street Fitzbillies. But enough of that. Launching us into this week's CrowdSourcery.
CrowdSourcery.
Thank you. Is Chris Burke, Technical Lead for Repton Property Developments and Property Consultant for Commonweal Housing, who gives us, quite simply, Ipswich Waterfront. Agreed, Chris, and thank you. Next up, Adam Peed, Business Development Strategist at Inuti, has us looking westward to the Wash. The historic part of King's Lynn and the waterfront is lovely, incredible history and buildings. The guys at King's Lynn creative firm This Is Fuller showcased it brilliantly here on Time Machine King's Lynn. That's www.tmkl.co.uk/aerial-tour. We turn next to a Cambridge recommendation from future guest on this very podcast, Dr. Tammy Dugan, Life Sciences and Healthcare Partnerships Lead at the University of Cambridge. Hinxton Watermill and Duxford on the Cam, both lovely spots. Ryan Baxter of Geode, meanwhile, is taking advantage of this showcase of this. Is taking advantage. Beep, 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 beep. Ryan Baxter of Geode, meanwhile, is taking advantage of this showcase of the stupendous. Ryan Baxter of Geode, meanwhile, is taking advantage of this showcase of the stupendous to talk up the Everything app. Everything in one place. Our tools would be good for things like this, Mike. You can drop a pin, name the location, then attach photo and video posts to it for others to scroll through and discover. You can get routed to its own car park, or if it doesn't have one, get routed to the closest public car park and then by foot. Each place you map becomes interactive too, meaning you can do stuff when you're physically at the location. Very close to launch. We look forward to that, thank you, Ryan. Next, Claire Haynes, Business Support Manager at the Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust, suggests an urban waterway that straddles 2 of our constituent counties. The River Waveney is good, especially for the canoeist and kayaker, thank you, Claire. And lastly, a winner of the Pan Anglia Medal for multiple entries across the region is Tarquin Bennett Coles, Senior Partner at SCI Partners, Advisor for Guy Me Limited, Pro Bono Mentor for the Homerton Changemakers, and Careers in Healthcare Supporter for the MBA and EMBA students at the Judds Institute. I love the Broads in Wroxham and the River Cam from the Plough Pub. Thank you for all those suggestions. And so, listeners, why not get out there and in a rivercraft of your choice, but do it sedately. Not like Engineer 49 almost did. I mean, thank goodness I stopped him before... Oh dear, look out, look out, look out! Thank you. Thank you very much. And on that unbelievably soggy note, thank you to Neil Fossett and Rachel Holden of NR Medical Training. Thank you to the Norwich Millennium Library, especially for the biscuits. Thank you to all my crowdsourcerers, and to the scourge of the cam himself, Engineer 49. And thank you to you. It's the summer holidays, and I'm so grateful to you for spending your time with me. So, farewell, my summer love. The boys of summer have gone. Although what with the weather, I'd call this a cruel summer. I'll be back with you in September. But until then, bye for now. You can contact Eastern Promise and find out more about what we do by visiting our website, easternpromise.org.uk. Eastern Promise is a Priors-Croft production on behalf of the Eastern Promise East Anglia Community Interest Company.